The night half the valley went dark, and everyone blamed me. At 2:17 in the morning, 2 luxury neighborhoods suddenly went dark. Gates froze, alarms screamed. Homeowners flooded the streets with flashlights, and by sunrise the local news was calling me the man who caused it all. The strange part? 30 minutes before the blackout, I was standing alone on the 1,000-acre ranch my father left me, listening to a sound buried beneath the land that shouldn't have existed. Then the HOA showed up, with deputies, legal threats, and a story that didn't add up. What started as an inheritance turned into a fight over hidden power lines, missing documents, and a secret so big it could bring down 2 entire neighborhoods. If you enjoy stories where truth beats pressure and patience beats power, subscribe and settle in, because this one only gets crazier from here. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, 2 of the wealthiest neighborhoods in our county went completely dark. The gates at Silver Creek Estates stopped first, then the security cameras, then the streetlights. Within seconds, backup alarms started screaming across the valley. People poured out of million-dollar homes carrying flashlights and phones, trying to figure out why their entire world had suddenly gone black. By sunrise, local news stations were parked outside the entrance to both neighborhoods, and according to HOA President Monica Ellison, the person responsible was me. My community has been under constant pressure from a new landowner who refuses to cooperate, she told a reporter while standing in front of a row of angry homeowners. What happened last night appears to be the direct result of reckless interference with critical infrastructure. I watched the interview from my kitchen table while drinking cold coffee. The accusation didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly she was willing to lie. Because 30 minutes before the blackout, I had been standing alone on the south ridge of my ranch, listening to something that should never have been making that sound. And if Monica Ellison knew what I knew, she wouldn't have been talking to reporters. She would have been talking to lawyers. My name is Caleb Turner. 4 months earlier, I inherited 1,000 acres of ranch land from my father, Ray Turner. The property sits west of town, stretching across cedar-covered ridges, limestone canyons, and open pasture that my family has worked for nearly 70 years. Most people see ranch land and think it's empty. My father used to say, that's because most people don't know what they're looking at. Land remembers things. Property lines, old roads, water routes, easements, promises. Every decision leaves a mark somewhere. Sometimes buried under dirt, sometimes buried in paperwork, and sometimes buried so deep people start believing nobody will ever find it. The night everything changed, I was checking fence lines near the south pasture. A heat wave had settled over Texas earlier than usual, and I'd been making extra rounds because dry conditions make cattle unpredictable. The air felt wrong, not hot, heavy, like pressure building before a storm. I was heading back toward my truck when I heard it. At first, I thought it was distant thunder, a low vibration rolling across the ground. Then I stopped walking. Thunder fades. This didn't. The sound stayed constant, a deep mechanical hum that seemed to pulse through the dirt beneath my boots. I shut off my flashlight and listened. The ranch became completely still. No insects, no coyotes, no wind. Just that sound, growing louder. My father spent years teaching me how to pay attention to things other people ignored. A broken fence post, a leaking water line, an unfamiliar vehicle track. Little details. The sound I was hearing wasn't natural, and it definitely wasn't supposed to be coming from the south ridge. I climbed into my pickup and followed an old service trail that cut through a section of cedar trees near the property boundary. The closer I got, the louder the vibration became. Then I saw something that immediately made my stomach tighten. Fresh dirt. Not a lot, but enough. A narrow strip running beside an old fence line. Recently disturbed. Recently covered. I killed the engine and stepped out. The smell hit me first. Hot insulation. Ozone. The sharp metallic scent you get around electrical equipment working harder than it should. I crouched near the dirt and brushed away a handful of loose soil. Underneath sat a bright orange utility marker. Brand new. I stared at it for several seconds. Nobody had requested access to my property. Nobody had contacted me about excavation work. And nobody had permission to be digging anywhere on my ranch. I followed the disturbed soil another 50 yards. Then my flashlight beam landed on something hidden beneath a cluster of cedar branches. A utility cabinet. Painted green. Unmarked. No county identification. No utility company logo. Nothing. Just sitting there like somebody hoped nobody would notice it. The humming sound was coming from beneath it, and it was getting stronger. A lot stronger. I took out my phone and snapped several photos. Then I noticed something else. Fresh tire tracks. Multiple vehicles. Heavy equipment. Recent. Very recent. Someone had been working out here. Working fast. Working quietly. And judging by the condition of the soil, they had finished only hours earlier. I stood there staring at the cabinet while questions started piling up in my head. Who put it there? Why hide it? And why was it running through my ranch? Then the humming changed. The pitch rose sharply for a second. Almost like a groan. The kind of sound machinery makes when it's under stress. I've never worked in utilities, but I know enough about equipment to recognize when something sounds wrong. Very wrong. I backed away and looked toward the distant valley. From the ridge, I could see lights from Silver Creek Estates and Canyon Ridge villas glowing against the darkness. Thousands of lights, pools, security gates, street lamps, large homes. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But standing there beside that hidden cabinet, listening to the strange vibration coming from beneath my land, I couldn't shake the feeling that those neighborhoods were connected to whatever was buried here. The thought sounded ridiculous, until exactly 2:17 a.m. The humming stopped, instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. For one brief second, the entire ridge went silent. Then the valley went dark. Every light, every street, every gate, gone. I stood there staring into the darkness where two luxury neighborhoods had existed only moments earlier. And for the first time that night, I realized this wasn't just a property dispute. Something enormous had been hidden beneath my father's ranch. Something powerful enough to shut down two entire neighborhoods. And by morning, Monica Ellison was already blaming me for it. What she didn't realize was that her accusation had made one thing painfully clear. She knew that infrastructure existed. The question was why. And the answer was buried somewhere on my land. By 8 that morning, every local news station in the county was running the same story. A wealthy HOA president claiming a stubborn ranch owner had caused a blackout that left two luxury neighborhoods in the dark. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored every call. Instead, I drove into town and pulled copies of the county property records connected to my father's ranch. If Monica Ellison was willing to blame me publicly before an investigation had even started, then she was scared of something. People only move that fast when they're trying to get ahead of the truth. The county records office sat inside an old limestone building near the courthouse square. I spent 3 hours reviewing easements tied to the Turner Ranch. Most of them were exactly what I expected: water access agreements, road maintenance rights, old grazing arrangements dating back decades. Then I found the utility easement, and immediately noticed something strange. The version on file with the county wasn't identical to the copy my father kept at home. The legal descriptions looked similar, almost identical, but not identical. One paragraph had been added. A small paragraph, easy to miss. The kind of change most people would never notice. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. The added language expanded infrastructure access rights far beyond what appeared in my father's copy. My stomach tightened, because the amendment carried a filing date from 6 years earlier, 3 years after my father had suffered a stroke. I photocopied everything and drove straight back to the ranch. The old house felt different after my father's death. Quieter, not empty, just unfinished, like he had stepped out for the afternoon and never returned. I went directly upstairs to his office. The room hadn't changed. His desk still faced the west pasture. The filing cabinets remained organized with the same military precision he'd used his entire life. My father believed paperwork mattered, especially land paperwork. People steal property with pens long before they steal it with bulldozers. He used to say that constantly. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Now I wasn't so sure. I unlocked the bottom filing cabinet and pulled out the utility folder. The original easement sat exactly where I'd left it, signed nearly 50 years earlier. The language was simple: a limited utility corridor serving agricultural operations. Nothing more. No commercial distribution rights. No neighborhood service rights. No expansion authority. Nothing remotely close to what I had seen in the county version. I spread both documents across the desk, side by side. The signatures matched. The legal stamps matched. The dates matched. But one paragraph existed in one version and not the other. Someone had changed something. The question was when, and more importantly, how. I searched through additional folders until I found another surprise: a yellow envelope hidden between old inspection reports. My father's handwriting covered the front. Utility issue. Do not discard. My pulse quickened. Inside sat a collection of photographs, survey markers, utility equipment, property maps, notes. Lots of notes. My father had been documenting something for years. One photo stopped me cold. It showed the same South Ridge area where I'd discovered the hidden utility cabinet the night before. Except the picture was nearly 4 years old. The cabinet was already there. Smaller, partially concealed, but definitely there. I flipped the photo over. My father's handwriting covered the back. Equipment appeared after survey crews from Silver Creek. No notification. No authorization. Another photo. More notes. Another. And another. Each one documenting unexplained utility activity on the ranch. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. My father had known something was wrong, and he'd been tracking it. Then I found the final page. A folded map. Several sections highlighted in red ink. A handwritten note sat beside one highlighted area. If corridor expands beyond this point, easement violation becomes obvious. I stared at the sentence for a long moment. Not because of what it said, because of when it was written. The date sat in the corner. 5 years ago. Years before anyone publicly mentioned infrastructure expansion. Years before Monica Ellison became HOA president. Years before the blackout. My father had seen this coming. Maybe not the blackout itself, but the expansion, the pressure, the conflict. He knew something was happening beneath the ranch, and he had spent years collecting evidence. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. Caleb Turner. Silence. Then a woman's voice. Smooth, controlled, confident. Mr. Turner, this is Monica Ellison. I leaned back slowly. What do you want? I think we should discuss yesterday's events before things become more complicated. Complicated. Interesting choice of words. I glanced down at the photographs spread across my father's desk. The survey maps, the notes, the altered easement, the hidden utility corridor. Something told me Monica wasn't calling because she wanted cooperation. She was calling because she had just realized I might know more than she expected. And if my father had spent years documenting this operation, then someone had been hiding the truth for a very long time. I looked at the phone pressed against my ear. Monica Ellison waited silently on the other end. Not nervous, not angry. Careful. That bothered me more than either of the other two. What exactly do you want to discuss? I asked. A brief pause. The future, she said, and how much easier things become when people cooperate. I almost laughed. My father used to say that cooperation was usually the first word people used when they wanted something that wasn't theirs. I'll keep that in mind. Good, Monica replied. Because this situation is attracting attention. Attention tends to create consequences. There it was. Not a threat. Close enough. Then she hung up. No explanation, no details, just pressure. I stared at the disconnected phone screen for several seconds before setting it down. An hour later, I found out exactly what kind of attention she meant. A convoy of vehicles rolled through my front gate shortly after noon. 2 sheriff's cruisers, a black SUV, and Monica's white Range Rover. I stepped onto the porch before they reached the house. Monica exited first, perfectly dressed despite the Texas heat, confident, like she expected to win. The deputies stayed near their vehicles, but Sheriff Wade Collins walked directly toward me. I knew Wade. Small county. Everybody knew everybody. He wasn't the type to enjoy getting dragged into property disputes. Afternoon, Caleb. Wade. His expression told me everything I needed to know. He didn't want to be here. Monica, however, looked delighted. Mr. Turner, she said, I'm glad we could finally meet under more official circumstances. I ignored her and looked at Wade. What's this about? Wade sighed. Complaint was filed this morning. By who? Monica answered before he could. Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Of course. I folded my arms. And what exactly am I accused of? She smiled. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Interfering with critical utility infrastructure. That got my attention. Not because it surprised me, because she said it so quickly, like she'd practiced it. Wade pulled a document from a folder. This isn't criminal, Caleb. Right now it's a property access dispute. Property access? Monica stepped forward. The neighborhoods I represent depend on utility services crossing portions of your ranch. I watched her carefully. Every word sounded rehearsed, Then whoever installed those services should have asked permission. They already had permission. No, I said. They didn't. The smile vanished, just for a second, but I saw it. A crack. Small. Important. Monica recovered immediately. The easement predates your ownership. My ownership didn't begin 4 months ago. Now she looked confused. I pointed toward the ranch. My family has owned this land for 70 years. Sheriff Collins shifted uncomfortably. The conversation wasn't going the way Monica expected. She reached into her purse and produced a folded document. I believe this clarifies the matter. She handed it to Wade. He passed it to me. The moment I opened it, I recognized the language. The amended easement. The altered version. The one that didn't match my father's records. Interesting. Very interesting. Because now I knew exactly which document Monica was relying on. I read it slowly, then folded it back up. Where did you get this? County records? I thought so. Monica's confidence returned. The county recognizes the infrastructure rights associated with that corridor. I nodded. And when was this amendment filed? Her expression tightened. Slightly. Several years ago. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched. Sheriff Collins looked between us. Monica finally answered. 6 years ago. Exactly. 6 years. Right when my father was dealing with serious health problems. Right when the hidden utility equipment began appearing in his photographs. I handed the document back. There's a problem. What problem? The version my father kept doesn't contain that language. For the first time, Monica stopped smiling entirely. Neither deputy moved. Neither spoke. Wade looked interested now. Very interested. You're saying the documents don't match? He asked. That's exactly what I'm saying. Monica immediately stepped in. That would be impossible. No, I replied. It would be illegal. The temperature of the conversation changed instantly. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Monica took a different approach. Mr. Turner, regardless of paperwork discrepancies, 2 communities rely on infrastructure crossing your ranch. There it was again. Not denial, redirection. She didn't dispute the discrepancy. She wanted to move past it, which told me she was worried about it. Very worried. I looked directly at her. What infrastructure? Another pause. Longer this time. Utility systems. What systems? More silence. Monica glanced toward Wade. Bad move, because now even he noticed. Finally, she answered. Emergency distribution equipment. The answer felt wrong. Too vague. Too careful. And suddenly something became obvious. She wasn't trying to prove the infrastructure existed. She was trying to legitimize it after the fact. My father's photographs flashed through my mind. The hidden cabinet, the survey markers, the notes, the warnings. He had seen this years ago. And now Monica was standing on my porch, trying to convince law enforcement that whatever was buried beneath my ranch belonged there. The problem was, she still hadn't explained what it actually was. Sheriff Collins closed his folder. Looks like this is going to need lawyers. Monica didn't like that answer. I could see it immediately. Because lawyers meant discovery. Discovery meant records. And records reveal things, especially when people have spent years trying to hide them. As the vehicles prepared to leave, Monica stopped beside her SUV and looked back at me. You should think carefully about your next move. I held up the amended easement. You should too. Her expression hardened. Then she drove away. I stood in the driveway, watching the dust settle behind the departing vehicles. For the first time since inheriting the ranch, I wasn't wondering whether something had been hidden beneath my land. I knew it had. The real question now was much bigger. What exactly were they powering? And why was Monica so desperate to keep anyone from looking too closely? That night, I decided it was time to find out. And I knew exactly who to call. Frank Delaney answered on the second ring. Caleb, I need another set of eyes. Silence. Then, how bad? I looked out the window toward the dark South Ridge. Bad enough that Monica Ellison brought deputies to my ranch. Another pause. I'll be there in an hour. Frank had spent more than 30 years working electrical infrastructure across Texas. If something involving utility systems bothered him, smart people paid attention. By 10 o'clock, his dusty white pickup was parked outside my house. I spread the documents across the kitchen table. The original easement, the altered easement, my father's photographs, survey maps, handwritten notes. Frank studied everything without speaking. The longer he looked, the more serious he became. Finally, he pointed to one of the photographs. When was this taken? 4 years ago. He leaned back slowly. That cabinet shouldn't be there. I nodded. That's what I thought. No, Frank said. You don't understand. Equipment like that doesn't appear by accident. That was all I needed to hear. 20 minutes later, we were heading toward the South Ridge. We reached the hidden utility cabinet shortly before midnight. Frank crouched beside it with a flashlight. The moment he opened the access panel, his entire expression changed. Jesus. I stepped closer. What is it? Instead of answering, he pointed inside. Heavy insulated conductors, industrial-grade switching hardware, equipment far beyond anything needed for agricultural service. Frank shook his head. This isn't ranch infrastructure. The knot in my stomach tightened. What is it? He looked up. Commercial distribution equipment. I stared at him. Commercial. Not agricultural. Not rural. Commercial. The exact opposite of what the original easement allowed. Frank closed the panel and stood. We keep going. The deeper we moved into the South Ridge, the worse things became. Fresh trench work, additional junction points, new conduit, equipment hidden behind cedar growth. Everything positioned carefully enough that most people would never notice it. But once you knew what you were looking for, it was impossible to miss. At one point, Frank stopped beside a limestone outcrop and pointed toward a section of disturbed ground. See that? I nodded. Recent excavation. We followed it downhill. The trail eventually led to something neither of us expected. A fenced utility enclosure concealed behind a thick wall of cedar trees. No signs, no markings, no company logos, nothing. Just a locked gate and a low mechanical hum. Frank stared at it for several seconds. Then he laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. You've got to be kidding me. What? He pointed toward the enclosure. That's a transfer station. I felt my pulse spike. A what? A power transfer station. The words landed hard, because even I knew what that meant. Transfer stations weren't small. They weren't temporary, and they definitely weren't supposed to be hidden on private ranch land. Frank walked the perimeter while I photographed everything. The farther we inspected, the worse the situation became. Cooling systems, switching equipment, high-capacity conduits, infrastructure worth millions of dollars, all sitting on land controlled by an easement that authorized little more than basic agricultural service. Then Frank stopped cold. He was staring south, toward the valley, toward the neighborhoods. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a notebook and started making calculations. Distances, routing directions, equipment size, load estimates. A minute later, he looked up. His expression had changed completely. Not surprise anymore. Concern. Real concern. "Caleb." "What?" "I think we've been asking the wrong question." The words hit harder than I expected. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the distant lights of Silver Creek Estates. "Everybody keeps acting like this is about one neighborhood." I followed his gaze. Then farther south, toward another cluster of lights. Canyon Ridge Villas. Frank slowly shook his head. "This system's too large." The silence stretched between us. I already knew where this was going. I just didn't want to hear it. "How large?" I asked. Frank exhaled. "Large enough to support both developments." For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood him. "Both?" He nodded. "Silver Creek and Canyon Ridge." I stared out across the valley. Thousands of homes, security gates, pools, street lighting, clubhouses, everything. Powered through infrastructure crossing my ranch. Infrastructure nobody had permission to build. The scale of it finally became clear. This wasn't a property dispute. It wasn't an HOA disagreement. It was a hidden utility network. And according to Frank, the entire thing depended on land it was never legally supposed to occupy. Then he said something even worse. "There's another problem." I looked at him. "What now?" Frank pointed toward one of the larger transfer assemblies. "I can hear it." The low vibration I'd heard before the blackout. The same hum, the same strain, only louder. Frank listened for several seconds. Then his jaw tightened. "That equipment is working way too hard." The words sent a chill through me. "What does that mean?" "It means the load is growing faster than the infrastructure." I looked back toward the valley lights. Everything appeared calm, normal, stable. But now I knew better. Beneath those neighborhoods sat a system nobody had properly disclosed. A system operating beyond the scope of its legal easement. And according to Frank, a system already showing signs of stress. Which raised a question neither of us could ignore. If this entire corridor was illegal, why was nobody shutting it down? Frank and I spent the next morning answering that question. The answer wasn't hidden in the field. It was hidden in paperwork. And somebody had worked very hard to keep that paperwork buried. By noon, I was sitting across from attorney Ellen Brooks. If Frank understood infrastructure, Ellen understood liability. She had spent 20 years handling land use disputes, easement conflicts, and property fraud cases across Texas. I laid everything on her conference table. The original easement, the amended version, my father's notes, the photographs, the survey maps, the utility equipment, the transfer station. Ellen didn't say much while she reviewed the documents, which worried me. Good lawyers talk less when things get worse. Finally, she set down the last page. "Whoever built this corridor has a problem." I leaned forward. "What kind of problem?" She tapped the original easement. This document authorizes agricultural utility access. Then she tapped the amended version. This document authorizes something completely different. Which one controls? That's what we're going to find out. She stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. I want county filings, utility permits, environmental reviews, inspection records, and every amendment connected to that corridor. Why? Ellen gave me a look. Because if somebody altered a legal easement, they left fingerprints somewhere. 3 days later, we found the first fingerprint. Then another. Then another. None of them made sense. The amendment Monica relied on existed in county records, but supporting documentation was missing. No engineering review, no environmental assessment, no approval package, no supporting application. Nothing. It was like somebody had inserted a page into the middle of a legal process without leaving any of the steps that normally came before it. Ellen stared at the file for nearly a minute. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she had found something. This is impossible. What is? This filing shouldn't exist. I looked at her. Meaning? She slid the document across the desk. The approval date sat clearly on the front page. I recognized it immediately. The same year my father suffered his stroke. The same year his health began declining. Ellen pointed at a signature block. Notice anything? I did. The signature line was blank. No landowner authorization, no witness certification, no attached approval. Nothing. I looked back up. So how was it accepted? Excellent question. For the first time since inheriting the ranch, I felt the balance begin to shift. Until now, Monica had controlled the narrative. She had reporters, public pressure, the blackout, the HOA. But evidence doesn't care about narratives. Evidence only cares about facts. And facts were beginning to pile up. The following week, Ellen filed formal records requests with multiple agencies: county planning, environmental compliance, utility oversight, infrastructure review boards. The responses arrived slowly, then all at once. And every answer created a bigger problem. Several inspection reports referenced equipment that did not officially exist. Permit numbers led nowhere. Infrastructure descriptions failed to match actual installations. One environmental review referenced a corridor expansion that had supposedly been canceled. Except Frank had photographed equipment installed exactly where that expansion was supposed to be. Someone had approved projects on paper. Someone else had built them anyway. By Friday, Ellen's office wall looked like a criminal investigation board. Maps, photos, permits, easements, inspection records. Everything connected by red notes and timelines. Then we discovered something that stopped all three of us cold. A maintenance report. 5 years old. Routine at first glance, until Frank noticed a classification code. He pointed at it immediately. That's commercial. Ellen looked up. What? Frank tapped the page. This equipment was classified as commercial distribution infrastructure. The room went quiet. Because commercial distribution changed everything. The original easement didn't authorize it. The amended easement didn't clearly authorize it. And yet somebody had documented it. Which meant somebody knew exactly what the corridor had become. Ellen immediately requested additional records tied to that classification. The response arrived 2 days later. Or rather, the lack of a response. The files were missing. Not unavailable. Missing. That distinction mattered. A lot. Because missing records create liability. And liability creates fear. The next sign of fear arrived sooner than expected. Monica appeared on television again. This time she wasn't blaming me for the blackout. She was warning residents. According to her, legal challenges from the Turner Ranch threatened critical services relied upon by thousands of homeowners. I watched the interview from my kitchen. Ellen watched it from her office. Frank called halfway through. "You seeing this?" "Unfortunately." He laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious. She's panicking. I thought about that. He was right. Monica wasn't attacking anymore. She was defending, which meant she knew pressure was building somewhere. And pressure only builds when people are afraid of what comes next. That afternoon, Ellen received an anonymous envelope. No return address, no note. Just copies of internal infrastructure correspondence. Dozens of pages. Most were heavily redacted, but one sentence remained visible. A sentence that changed everything. Corridor expansion approved pending continued regulatory flexibility. Ellen read it twice, then handed it to me. I stared at the words. Regulatory flexibility. Corporate language. Polite language. Dangerous language. The kind people use when they don't want to write the real thing. Frank summed it up best. They knew. Nobody argued, because by then it was obvious. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight, and it definitely wasn't an accident. Powerful people had been protecting this corridor for years. The only question left was how many, and how far up the chain it went. We got our first answer 3 days later. Not from regulators, not from the utility company, from the residents. Somebody leaked information about the hidden corridor. To this day, I still don't know who. Maybe an employee, maybe an engineer, maybe someone who finally got tired of protecting a bad decision. What I do know is that by Friday morning, homeowners across Silver Creek Estates and Canyon Ridge Villas were asking questions their HOA boards couldn't answer. The neighborhood forums exploded. Residents wanted engineering reports, infrastructure maps, inspection records, maintenance histories. For years, people had assumed electricity came from somewhere beyond the horizon. Now they were learning a large portion of it crossed private ranch land under a disputed easement. And they weren't happy. By noon, local news stations had shifted their coverage. The story was no longer about the blackout. It was about the corridor, the hidden infrastructure, the missing permits, the altered easement. The questions kept multiplying. The answers didn't. That imbalance created panic. My phone rang constantly. Some callers were angry. Others were worried. A few sounded genuinely scared. One homeowner from Canyon Ridge left a voicemail that stayed with me. "If this thing is illegal, what happens to our houses?" That was the problem. People had started connecting the dots. Infrastructure uncertainty becomes financial uncertainty very quickly. And expensive communities are built on confidence. The moment confidence disappears, everything starts shaking. By the following Monday, insurance companies had entered the conversation. Ellen called me that afternoon. "They're asking questions." "Who is?" "Everyone." That got my attention. She explained that multiple carriers had requested updated compliance reviews tied to utility infrastructure serving both developments. Insurance companies don't like surprises, especially infrastructure surprises. Especially infrastructure surprises connected to liability. By evening, rumors were spreading faster than facts. Some people claimed the neighborhoods would lose power permanently. Others claimed lawsuits were already underway. Neither was true. But fear doesn't need facts. It just needs uncertainty. Frank arrived at the ranch the next morning, carrying a stack of utility load estimates. He dropped them on my kitchen table. "You need to see this." I looked down. Numbers, charts, capacity calculations. The kind of paperwork most people ignore. Frank pointed to a column highlighted in red. "That's demand growth." I studied it. The increase was enormous. What caused it? Everything. Pools, security systems, electric vehicle chargers, large homes. More development, more consumption, more pressure. The corridor wasn't supporting the same neighborhoods it had supported 5 years earlier. It was carrying substantially more load, and according to Frank's calculations, the infrastructure wasn't keeping up. "How bad?" I asked. Frank leaned back. "Worse than I expected." Those weren't words Frank used casually. He pointed toward another section. "The system is running hotter every year." A knot formed in my stomach. "Can it handle summer?" He didn't answer immediately. That told me enough. Finally, he spoke. "Maybe." Maybe. One of the most dangerous words in infrastructure. Maybe means uncertainty. Maybe means risk. Maybe means nobody actually knows. That afternoon, another story broke. A regional business publication reported that investors connected to future development projects had begun reviewing exposure tied to utility infrastructure questions. The article wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Investors asking questions was news all by itself. Because investors only ask questions when money feels threatened. Monica clearly understood that. For the first time since this started, she requested a private meeting. Not a press conference. Not an interview. A meeting. Ellen joined me at a restaurant halfway between town and the developments. Monica arrived alone. No reporters. No board members. No audience. Interesting. The conversation started politely. It didn't stay that way. "You're creating a lot of instability," Monica said. Ellen almost smiled. "Instability existed before my client found it." Monica ignored her. "Thousands of people depend on that corridor." I looked directly at her. "Then somebody should have built it legally." Silence. For a moment, she looked genuinely frustrated. Not angry. Cornered. Then she tried another angle. "What exactly do you want?" That question told me everything. Because people stop asking for cooperation when they realize they might lose. They start asking for terms. Ellen answered before I could. "The truth." Monica looked away, just briefly, but long enough. The meeting ended 20 minutes later without an agreement. As she walked toward her vehicle, she stopped, then turned back. "You don't understand how many people are involved." Ellen watched her leave, then quietly said the thing neither of us could stop thinking about. "That's probably true." The next week brought record temperatures, the hottest stretch of the summer so far. Air conditioners ran constantly, power demand climbed, and Frank's concern grew. Every day he checked new readings from equipment connected to the corridor. Every day his expression got worse. Finally, he spread a map across my kitchen table. The South Ridge, the transfer station, the neighborhoods, everything connected. Then he pointed toward a section highlighted in yellow. This is where I'd be watching. I stared at the map. Why? Frank folded his arms. Because if this system is going to fail, his finger tapped the paper. It starts there. The room went quiet. Outside, the valley lights still looked normal, stable. safe. But appearances were becoming harder to trust. Because beneath those neighborhoods sat a system carrying more load than it was ever designed to handle. And according to Frank, summer had only just begun. The question wasn't whether pressure was building. The question was whether the corridor could survive it. And nobody seemed certain anymore. The uncertainty ended on a Thursday afternoon, when Ellen received a call from a state infrastructure review office. I was sitting in her office when she put the phone on speaker. The official was brief, professional, direct. Several complaints tied to undocumented utility infrastructure had triggered a formal review. Inspectors would be arriving Tuesday morning. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Frank looked at me. They're finally coming. Ellen nodded. And somebody is going to have to explain a lot of missing paperwork. The inspection changed everything. Until then, the people behind the corridor had been operating in shadows. Now there was a deadline. And deadlines make people nervous, especially when they have something to hide. The first sign of panic appeared 48 hours later, just after midnight. My phone buzzed beside the bed. Motion alert, South Ridge camera. I sat up immediately. Months earlier, after finding my father's photographs, I had installed several trail cameras near the utility corridor. At the time, it felt cautious. Now, it felt necessary. I opened the live feed, then stared. Floodlights, excavators, work trucks, contractors. At least a dozen people moving across my ranch in the middle of the night. I switched to a second camera, then a third. The entire south corridor was active. Fresh trenching, heavy equipment, portable generators. Nobody performs emergency construction at 1 a.m. unless something is very wrong. I called Frank. He answered immediately, almost like he wasn't asleep. "You seeing this?" "Already on my way." That answer told me everything. 20 minutes later, we were parked on a ridge overlooking the operation. The scene looked chaotic. Crews worked under portable floodlights while trench machines cut through the soil. Large cable reels sat beside open trenches. Equipment cases were scattered everywhere. People were moving too fast, making too many mistakes. Frank watched silently through binoculars. Then he lowered them. "This isn't maintenance. What is it?" He pointed toward the trench. "They're installing bypass lines." The words hit hard. "Why?" Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept watching. Finally, he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Because they know the inspectors are coming." Below us, another truck arrived. Then another. The operation kept growing. More workers, more equipment, more urgency. Nobody behaves like that unless they're trying to finish something before someone arrives. Then I spotted a familiar vehicle. A black SUV parked near the edge of the work zone. I recognized it instantly. Monica Ellison. She wasn't directing traffic. She wasn't holding a shovel. She was standing beside the operation, talking on a phone while watching everything unfold. That told me all I needed to know. This wasn't a utility emergency. This was damage control. I started recording. Photos, video, license plates, equipment, everything. If people were going to work on my ranch without permission, I wanted proof. Frank continued watching the trench crews, then suddenly lowered the binoculars. "No." "What?" He looked genuinely alarmed, for the first time since I'd met him. "No, no, no." I followed his gaze. Workers were feeding new cable through a trench section connected directly to one of the transfer assemblies we'd discovered earlier. Frank shook his head. They're not repairing the problem. I looked back at him. What do you mean? His answer came immediately. They're hiding it. The realization landed like a punch. Everything clicked. The rushed construction, the overnight schedule, the floodlights, the panic, the approaching inspection. They weren't fixing unsafe infrastructure. They were trying to make it look safe long enough to survive inspection. Frank grabbed the binoculars again, then swore under his breath. I had never heard him do that. What now? He handed me the binoculars. I looked through them. The trench connected directly into a section of the corridor already carrying heavy load. Temporary cable, temporary routing, temporary solutions, temporary everything. The exact kind of infrastructure shortcuts that create bigger problems later. Frank folded his arms. They're buying time. The phrase sounded familiar, because it matched everything we'd found. Missing reports, delayed reviews, hidden permits, regulatory flexibility. Every decision pointed toward the same strategy. Buy time, delay consequences, hope nobody notices. The problem was that inspectors were finally coming, and reality was running out of patience. Then lightning flashed across the horizon, a summer storm moving toward the valley. The contractors noticed it too. Their pace doubled. Equipment moved faster. Generators roared louder. The entire operation felt desperate. Because it was. Monica finished her phone call and turned toward the trench crews. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her movements. The confidence she'd shown at my gate was gone. This wasn't the behavior of someone protecting a legal project. This was the behavior of someone racing against a deadline. A dangerous deadline. Frank watched for another minute, then quietly said something that neither of us could ignore. If inspectors see what was here before tonight, they're in trouble. I looked down at the construction site. And if inspectors see what they're doing now? Frank's expression hardened. Then they're in even bigger trouble. The storm kept moving closer. The contractors kept digging. And somewhere beneath the ranch, hidden beneath years of paperwork and excuses, a system already struggling under pressure was about to face one more burden. The question was whether it could survive long enough to fool the inspectors, or whether the truth would finally break through first. The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. The state inspectors showed up Tuesday morning. 2 vehicles, 3 inspectors. No media, no drama. Just clipboards, cameras, and questions. The kind of people who didn't care about excuses. Frank joined me at the South Ridge while Ellen coordinated document requests from town. The inspectors spent the first hour reviewing maps and easement records. The second hour examining equipment. The third hour asking questions nobody seemed eager to answer. One of them stopped beside a transfer cabinet and frowned. Who approved this expansion? Nobody had an answer. Because every answer created another problem. The inspection continued through the afternoon. By sunset, word had spread throughout both neighborhoods. Residents watched from a distance. HOA board members disappeared. Contractors suddenly became difficult to reach. And Monica Ellison stopped returning calls. That alone told me the inspection wasn't going well. The following 3 days were the hottest of the year. Temperatures pushed past 100 degrees. Demand surged. Every air conditioner in the valley seemed to be running non-stop. Frank spent most of his time monitoring equipment readings. Every update looked worse. Every graph climbed higher. Every conversation ended the same way. Too much load, not enough capacity. On Friday evening, He arrived at my ranch carrying a thermal scanner. "Come with me." We drove directly to the South Ridge. The moment we stepped out of the truck, I heard it. The hum. Only now it wasn't a hum. It was a strain. A deep vibration rolling through the equipment. Louder than before. Frank aimed the thermal scanner at one of the transfer assemblies. The display lit up immediately. Bright white, bright yellow, heat everywhere. Frank stared at the screen, then shook his head. "That's not good." I didn't need technical training to understand that. The equipment looked like it was cooking itself. "What happens if it keeps climbing?" Frank didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Eventually something gives." Neither of us liked that answer. The next day brought another round of bad news. State inspectors requested emergency engineering disclosures tied to the corridor. That request spread through the developments like wildfire. Homeowners panicked. Investors started calling. Insurance carriers demanded updates. The pressure was no longer private. It was public. Monica finally resurfaced late Saturday afternoon. Not on television, at my ranch. She arrived alone. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked exhausted. No confidence, no rehearsed speeches, just stress. "I need 5 minutes." I didn't invite her inside. We stood on the porch. She looked toward the South Ridge before speaking. "You need to stop escalating this." I almost laughed. Escalating it? People are scared. People should have been informed. Her jaw tightened. "Thousands of residents depend on that corridor." I nodded. Then somebody should have built it legally. The conversation ended exactly where every conversation with Monica ended. With silence. Because facts don't negotiate. Before leaving, she looked at me. Really looked at me. Then said something that stayed with me. "You don't understand how much is connected to this." Then she drove away. That night, Frank called just after 11. His voice sounded different. Urgent. "Get to the ridge." I was in my truck less than 2 minutes later. When I arrived, he was already there. The moment I stepped out, I smelled it. Ozone. Sharp. Metallic. Wrong. Frank pointed toward a transformer assembly overlooking the canyon. "Look." Tiny sparks danced near one of the insulators. Not large, not dramatic, but visible. And visible was bad. The thermal scanner confirmed it. Temperatures were higher than anything we'd recorded before. The transformer groaned again. A low mechanical sound that rolled across the ridge. I watched Frank's expression. It told me everything. How serious? His answer came quietly. Serious enough. The sparks continued. The temperatures climbed. And below us sat thousands of homes relying on the same overloaded corridor. The inspectors had exposed the paperwork problems. Now the equipment itself was beginning to tell the same story. A story nobody could hide anymore. Frank lowered the scanner, then said the sentence I had been dreading. "If this heat keeps up, somebody's going to have to make a decision." I looked back toward the valley. The lights still glowed. Pools, street lamps, security gates. Everything appeared normal. But appearances had been lying to everyone for years. The transformer groaned again. Louder this time. Then another spark jumped. Neither of us moved. Because we both understood something the homeowners didn't. The danger wasn't losing power. The danger was waiting too long to do something about it. And somewhere inside that corridor, The system was running out of time. The call came at 10:43 the next night. Frank. I answered immediately. "It's happening." That was all he said. Then the line went dead. I was already grabbing my keys. By the time I reached the South Ridge, emergency vehicles were arriving from 3 different directions. State inspectors, utility crews, county fire units. Nobody was moving casually anymore. The transformer assembly overlooking the canyon was screaming. Not humming, not vibrating, screaming. A deep metallic groan echoed through the ridge every few seconds. The kind of sound machinery makes right before it fails. Frank met me near the monitoring trailer. His face told me everything. "We've got thermal runaway." I didn't need the technical explanation. The numbers on the monitoring screens were enough. Temperatures were climbing. Fast. Too fast. Utility engineers argued around a folding table covered in maps. State officials stood nearby making calls. Nobody seemed willing to make the decision everyone knew was coming. Shut it down. Because shutting it down meant blacking out 2 entire neighborhoods, and nobody wanted responsibility for that. Then the first arc flashed. A burst of blue-white light cracked across the transformer housing. Several people stepped backward instinctively. The equipment groaned again. Louder. The smell of ozone filled the air. Frank looked at one of the engineers. "How long?" The answer came immediately. "Not long." That was when the fire started. At first it was small. A thin line of flame beneath dry grass near the base of the structure. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to turn everyone's attention in the same direction. Then the wind shifted. The flames spread. Not far, but far enough. Suddenly the conversation changed. This was no longer a paperwork problem, no longer an infrastructure review. Now it was an active emergency. County fire crews moved into position. Utility workers pulled back. The transformer arced again. Another burst of light. Another shower of sparks. And still, nobody authorized a shutdown. Because everybody was afraid. Afraid of lawsuits. Afraid of consequences. Afraid of becoming the person blamed for killing power to thousands of homes. Then Monica arrived. Her SUV stopped beside the command area. She stepped out before it fully parked. No reporters, no lawyers. Just Monica. And for the first time since this began, she looked terrified. She walked directly toward me. Not Frank, not the engineers. Me. Caleb. I said nothing. She glanced toward the transformer, toward the flames, then back at me. "You can't let them shut it down." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The ridge is burning. It can still be controlled." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed, like she'd been repeating it to herself. Frank stepped closer. "You're out of time." Monica ignored him. Her eyes never left mine. "If that feed dies tonight, everything collapses." There it was. Not public safety, not residents. Collapse. The word she'd been avoiding for weeks. Property values, financing, investments, insurance. Everything tied to the corridor. Everything tied to the lie. Then Ellen Brooks arrived. She wasn't alone. 2 state investigators walked beside her, carrying document folders. Even before she spoke, I knew something had happened. Ellen handed me a stack of printed emails. "Read page 3. I did. Then page 4. Then 5. Every page made the situation worse. Internal discussions, engineering warnings, infrastructure reviews. Repeated recommendations to address overheating equipment. Years of warnings. Years. Ignored. Delayed. Buried. Then I found Monica's name, multiple times. Meeting summaries, email chains, approval discussions. One message stopped me cold. Thermal risk acknowledged. Expansion schedule remains priority. I looked up slowly. Monica said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. She knew. The developers knew. The boards knew. And they had chosen delay over repair, again and again, until the system reached the edge of failure. The transformer screamed once more. The flames spread another few feet. An engineer shouted something from the monitoring station. Temperatures climbing, still climbing. Frank looked toward the emergency disconnect structure, then at me. Nobody else moved. Nobody else wanted the decision, but everybody knew what the decision was. I looked at the fire, the emails, the ridge, the neighborhoods below. Then at Monica. For the first time, she wasn't trying to intimidate me. She was begging. Please. One word. Quiet. Desperate. I thought about my father, about the photographs, the notes, the altered easement, the years spent hiding the truth. Then I turned away. The disconnect structure stood less than 50 yards away. Frank followed. So did the utility crews. The transformer arced again, brighter than before. The fire line widened. The choice was gone. Only the consequences remained. I grabbed the emergency disconnect lever. For 1 second, everything felt completely still. Then I pulled. The reaction was immediate. A violent flash erupted across the ridge. The transformer discharged. The humming stopped. The vibration stopped. The corridor went silent. And across the valley, the lights began disappearing. Streetlights, clubhouses, security gates, pools, homes. One section after another. Darkness rolled through Silver Creek Estates. Then Canyon Ridge Villas. The valley went black. Complete silence followed. No alarms, no machinery, no transformers. Nothing. The fire crews moved in immediately. Without energized equipment feeding heat into the system, the flames began dying almost at once. Around me, people started talking again, moving again, working again. But I barely heard any of it. I was staring across the dark valley, watching the consequences of years of bad decisions unfold all at once. The blackout had finally happened. The question now was whether I had saved 2 neighborhoods, or become the man everyone blamed for plunging them into darkness. By sunrise, I had my answer. At first, the headlines were brutal. Ranch owner shuts down power to thousands. HOA communities left in darkness. Emergency blackout rocks Texas Valley. For a few hours, it looked like Monica might win the narrative after all. Then, investigators released their preliminary findings. Everything changed. The first report confirmed that the transformer failure had been imminent. The second confirmed that the corridor had been operating beyond approved easement limits. The third was the one that mattered most. Emergency de-energization likely prevented significant infrastructure damage and potential fire spread. Those 12 words destroyed months of accusations. By noon, reporters stopped asking why I pulled the disconnect. They started asking why nobody else had. The blackout lasted 9 hours. The investigations lasted years. Within days, state agencies seized records tied to the corridor. Inspection reports surfaced. Engineering reviews emerged. Missing documents suddenly appeared. And every new file pointed in the same direction. People had known. Not everyone, but enough. Frank called me the morning the first leaked emails hit the news. "You watching this?" I turned on the television. Every major station was covering the story. Internal correspondence, engineering warnings, deferred maintenance recommendations, thermal risk assessments. The same concerns that had been buried for years were now being read on air. One email appeared repeatedly. A consultant warning that continued growth along the corridor could create severe reliability risks. The date shocked everyone. 4 years earlier. 4 years. The warning had existed long before I inherited the ranch. Long before the blackout. Long before anyone claimed the problem was unexpected. Then came another email. And another. And another. Each one chipped away at the same defense. Nobody knew. Because somebody clearly had. The pressure became unbearable. Silver Creek Estates lost 3 board members in a week. Canyon Ridge Villas lost 2 more. Resignations spread through both developments. Homeowners demanded answers. Investors demanded records. Insurance carriers demanded explanations. Nobody wanted promises anymore. They wanted names. Monica disappeared from public view for nearly a month. When she finally resurfaced, it was through a resignation statement. No interviews, no speeches. Just a carefully worded announcement stepping down from all leadership positions. The woman who had arrived at my gate with deputies now couldn't defend her own board. But Monica wasn't the real story anymore. The paper trail was. Ellen spent the next year helping coordinate legal actions tied to the easement dispute. The altered records, the unauthorized expansions, the concealed infrastructure. One by one, the facts became impossible to dispute. The original agricultural easement had been stretched far beyond its legal limits. Expansion projects had continued despite repeated warnings. Critical reviews had been delayed. Documentation had been manipulated. And the ranch had become the foundation of a utility system it never legally agreed to support. The settlements arrived quietly. No dramatic courtroom speeches. No television spectacle. Just signatures, checks, agreements. Millions of dollars paid to resolve claims nobody wanted examined under oath. Ellen told me something during one settlement meeting that I never forgot. Most cases don't end when people discover the truth. I asked what she meant. They end when people realize how expensive the truth is. That turned out to be exactly right. The illegal corridor was eventually removed. Every section, every transfer station, every concealed connection. State-supervised crews documented the process from beginning to end. No hidden construction, no midnight trenching, no shortcuts. Just transparency, the way it should have happened from the start. Power to the neighborhoods was rerouted through a fully permitted corridor east of the valley. The new route cost a fortune, far more than doing it correctly years earlier would have. Frank shook his head the first time he saw the final numbers. Greed always sends a bigger bill later. Hard to argue with that. 2 years after the blackout, the new system finally went online. That evening, my daughter came to the ranch with barbecue and folding chairs. We sat on the ridge overlooking the valley. The same ridge where I'd watched the lights disappear. Now we watched them return. One neighborhood lit up, then another. Streetlights, homes, gate systems, everything. Stable, legal, documented. No secrets, no hidden corridors beneath my ranch. No lies buried under easements. Just infrastructure built the right way. My daughter watched the valley glow for a long moment. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asked. So who really caused the blackout? I looked toward the south ridge. The illegal corridor was gone. The transfer station was gone. The hidden equipment was gone. Only open land remained. The same land my father spent his life protecting. Then I looked back at the lights across the valley. They did. She frowned slightly. The HOA? I shook my head. Not just them. The wind moved softly across the ranch. The people who kept pretending the system wasn't broken. She thought about that, then nodded. Because deep down, everybody already knew the answer. The blackout wasn't caused by the man who pulled the switch. It was caused by the people who spent years ignoring the warning signs. The people who chose delay over responsibility. The people who treated truth like a problem that could wait until tomorrow. The valley lights shimmered quietly beneath the Texas sky. For the first time in a very long while, nothing underneath them was hidden.
And nothing underneath them was lying anymore. If that lesson one I take from this story is that problems don't get smaller just because people avoid them. For years, warning signs were ignored, paper roads were pushed aside, and temporary fixes were treated like permanent solutions. In the end, the truth came out anyway, not because someone wanted a fight, but because reality has a way of catching up to every decision we make. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is face a problem early, but it's almost always easier than waiting until it's become a crisis. And maybe that's true for more than power lines and rent land, whether it's property, family, business, or community. Trust is built when people are honest about what's really there. Standing your ground doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it means staying calm, keeping records, asking questions, and refusing to ignore what you know is wrong. I'd love to hear what you think. If you were in Carla's position, would you help pull the disconnect to prevent a bigger disaster? Comment yes or no below. And if you ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where the facts matter more than the pressure, share your story in the comment too. And if you enjoy stories about ordinary people standing firm with patience, evidence, and common sense, be sure to subscribe. There are plenty more HOA, ranch, and land price story ahead. And I'd be glad to have you along for this journey.